Okay, so what if I told you that the secret to literally reversing the biological age of your cells, like reformatting your DNA like a factory reset hard drive, starts by intentionally suffocating yourself for exactly 64 seconds?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and doing it 21 times a day.
I mean, if you look at that through the lens of traditional Western medicine, it just sounds like a fast track to brain damage.
Right, because we're so conditioned to view human biology as this closed loop hardware system.
Exactly. You break a bone, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, the doctor slaps a cast on it, you just wait.
Yeah, you get the genetic cards you're dealt, and then from the moment you hit, like, your mid-20s, the prevailing narrative is just this slow, managed decline.
It's a very mechanistic view. We think of our bodies as machines that are just inevitably rusting out.
Sure, I mean, you change the oil with a good diet, maybe you run a few miles so the engine doesn't seize up. But the fundamental structural limits, we think they're hard-coded.
Right, so when we start talking about radically upgrading the nervous system, actually treating human biology as an adaptable open source software platform, the conversation usually derails,
It totally does. It leaves the realm of measurable science and just immediately plunges into, well, aesthetic mysticism.
which almost always features a very specific, highly romanticized image.
Yes, the guy on the mountain.
Exactly. The assumption is that to reach the absolute upper limits of human potential, whether you label that enlightenment or, radical bioenergetic optimization, you have to completely divorce yourself from modern society.
You sell all your possessions, move to a remote cave, survive on lentils, and just meditate in absolute silence for 40 years.
And that exact dichotomy is what we're systematically dismantling today.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we are exploring a foundational set of materials that proposes a completely different framework.
A deeply detailed, highly technical biohacking protocol.
Right, designed specifically to upgrade the human nervous system.
Yeah.
But the crucial distinction here is that this system wasn't built for a silent ashram.
No, it was stress-tested and optimized for individuals who are navigating high-stress careers, complex relationships, and just the brutal friction of a 21st century existence.
So to understand the protocol, we really have to establish the architect. We are pulling directly from the extremely detailed logs of an individual known as Osman.
Widely referred to in his community as the blind Muslim yogi.
Right, and his credentials demand immediate attention. We are talking about someone with 50 years of continuous, rigorous practice.
50 years.
Mm.
And he's a master-level bioenergy healer. He specializes in critical care recovery and terminal illnesses.
And the source material gets highly specific about his capabilities here. He utilizes telepathic healing operating on the principles of quantum entanglement.
Now, before anyone tunes out thinking we're diving into ungrounded magic, let's put up the guardrails.
Yeah, please.
Osman himself makes it explicitly clear his services are offered on a complementary basis. They are not a replacement for traditional medical treatment.
Right. He uses these methods to enhance whatever is lacking in standard medical fields, not to, subvert them entirely.
And that pragmatism is key. His high success rate over the last 5 decades stems from an obsessive, intensive study spanning various schools of thought.
From the Far East, the Middle East, the West. I mean, at certain stages of his life, his practice extended to 18 hours a day.
Yeah, and currently he maintains a minimum of 8 to 10 hours a day, just, as he puts it, sharpening the sword.
Sharpening the sword, I love that. So our mission for this deep dive is to impartially report on the measurable mechanics he outlines. We are going to look at carbon dioxide tolerance, central nervous system voltage, tissue repair.
We're focusing on the neurobiology and the biomechanics, and I want to be clear, we're doing this without necessarily endorsing any specific spiritual worldview. We're just looking at the data and the logs.
Exactly. And Osman's biography is just a severe system shock to the stereotype of that fragile, detached guru floating above daily life.
Oh, absolutely. His pursuit of the underlying mechanics, the source code of human biology, basically started in childhood.
Yeah, he began his initial exploration into yoga at 7 years old. 7.
And by the time he was 10, his mother gifted him a massive 30-volume encyclopedia on the science of yoga.
Just picture the cognitive framing there. You have a 10-year-old child reading a 30-volume technical treatise on human bioenergetics.
Right. He wasn't just casually stretching in gym class. He was hunting for the anatomical triggers from day one.
And that intense analytical pressure yielded results incredibly early. Because by the time he was 19, he hit a neurological threshold that classical yogic traditions refer to as a peak samadhi.
Let's strip away the esoteric language for a second and ground that neurologically.
Yeah, what's actually happening in the brain there?
When esoteric texts describe samadhi, what they're actually pointing to is a profound systemic shift in brainwave states and default mode network activity.
The default mode network, right? So that's the interconnected brain regions responsible for your sense of ego, your constant self-referential thoughts, the narrator in your head, basically.
Precisely. In a state of samadhi, neuroimaging of similar advanced practitioners shows that the default mode network essentially goes offline.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's accompanied by an overwhelming surge of high-amplitude gamma waves across the central nervous system.
So the boundary between the self and the environment just dissolves.
Exactly. Practitioners and esoteric traditions will literally spend lifetimes in isolated meditation, hoping to trigger this exact neuroelectrical event.
Which makes his reaction to hitting this ultimate spiritual peak as a teenager arguably the most defining moment of his entire philosophy.
Because he didn't view it as a triumph at all.
Not at all. The sheer force of the central nervous system surge literally knocked him unconscious.
And when he regained coherence over an hour later, his immediate response wasn't some profound declaration of ultimate liberation.
No, his first thought was, how on earth am I going to pay my university tuition if my brain is completely melted?
It's a brilliantly grounding reaction.
It's hilarious. His father had mandated financial independence the moment he turned 18.
Right.
So it's like hitting the ultimate spiritual lottery, but immediately stressing about the tax implications. You're experiencing the absolute peak of human consciousness, and your primary concern is your employability.
But this pragmatism forced a critical choice. He actually had open invitations to join established ashrams at that time.
Yeah, they would have provided housing, food, and basically solved his financial problems instantly.
But he looked at the requirements. Mandatory celibacy, isolation from society, the absolute renunciation of worldly ambition, and he unequivocally rejected them.
He wanted a career. He wanted to engage in relationships. He wanted societal friction.
And if we look at modern discussions on spirituality, this tension is everywhere. Look at Rainn Wilson's Soul Boom podcast.
Oh, yeah. Great show.
In his interview with Reza Aslan discussing the context of Sufism and mysticism in Islam, they touch on this exact idea.
Right. That true spiritual resilience isn't found in a cave. It's found in the marketplace.
Exactly. Or when Rainn interviewed Arthur Brooks about happiness and detachment, the goal isn't to own nothing and feel nothing. It's to engage fully without being destroyed by the attachment.
We see the exact same parallel in Rick Archer's Buddha at the gas pump. Rick constantly interviews awakened individuals who have to navigate, normal life.
Yeah, in his episode with Craig Holliday, they discuss the severe danger of non-dual bypass.
Using spiritual states to just avoid the messy reality of human psychology and responsibility.
Right. And Osman recognized this fundamental flaw 50 years ago. If a system of optimization requires you to abandon your family and your social utility, it is a fragile, flawed system.
It's like having a hypercar that only runs on a perfectly smooth, temperature-controlled indoor test track.
Right. The second you take it onto a real road with potholes and traffic, the suspension just shatters.
Osman wanted a biological operating system that could run every heavy background app of modern life simultaneously without crashing.
So having chosen the real world over the ashram, he spent decades intentionally subjecting his biology to extreme stress.
He navigated the corporate world, managed multiple businesses, and went through sequential marriages, 6 in total.
He utilized pub culture and whiskey to downregulate his nervous system, anchoring himself in genuine social connection after intensely demanding corporate days.
And then we hit May 2023, a severe biological curveball.
A massive one. Osman permanently lost his eyesight.
And it's really crucial to note here, for context regarding his later protocols, he describes things visually in his logs because he had normal eyesight for his entire life prior to May 2023.
Right, but when the blindness hit, instead of retreating into dependency, he maintained absolute self-sufficiency.
He took a job at a busy hotel reception desk.
Which is wild. The neuroplasticity required to do that is staggering. If you listen to Dr. Tara Swart on the Mel Robbins podcast, she dives deep into brain chemistry and neuroplasticity.
Yeah, when a primary sensory input like vision is lost, the visual cortex doesn't just sit dormant.
Exactly. It has to rapidly remap to process tactile and auditory information. For Osman to memorize a complex hotel layout and physically guide guests while entirely blind speaks to a profoundly adaptable neural architecture.
There's this amazing anecdote in his logs about operating the cash register. He functioned as the financial hub of the business, entirely blind.
He developed a tactile identification system, feeling the minute physical differences in the sizes of various currency notes.
Handling thousands of dollars a day with absolute precision.
What's fascinating here is Stephen Bartlett often explores this kind of extreme human resilience on The Diary of a CEO.
Oh, the Mo Goddard episode.
Yes. In his interview with Mo Goddard, they discuss how the brain processes suffering and adaptation. Mo emphasizes that happiness and functionality are equations based on expectations versus reality.
Osman didn't lower his expectations for his life. He just forced his biology to adapt to the new reality.
So if you are listening to this, you have to ask yourself a highly practical question.
Right. Would you rather have an esoteric state of enlightenment that renders you incapable of handling a real-world crisis, or a structured biological protocol that allows you to handle profound physical disability, demanding jobs, and maintain high energy?
Osman is basically a high-performance athlete who intentionally scheduled a burger and a beer into his routine because the contrast makes the discipline sustainable.
But to survive that level of multidimensional pressure, sheer willpower is completely insufficient. You need an engineered biological infrastructure.
And this brings us to a critical warning Osman emphasizes. Do not attempt advanced energetic surging, what esoteric texts call kundalini, without foundational hardware upgrades.
Right. If you try to run industrial level voltage through a standard household wire, the wire simply melts.
So the hardware upgrade starts with respiration, but not the relaxing ambient breathing you do at the end of a yoga class.
No, he outlines a highly specific physiological rhythm designated as the 1-4-2 ratio.
For every 1 count of inhalation, you retain the breath for 4 counts, followed by a 2-count exhalation.
That is the base structure. But Osman focuses relentlessly on a threshold he calls level 4.
This is where the protocol transitions from relaxation into a grueling biological hack.
Level 4 requires a 16-count inhalation, a massive 64-count breath hold, and a 32-count exhalation.
And this cycle must be repeated for 21 consecutive rounds.
Okay, let's just pause on that. 16 inches, 64 hold, 32 out, 21 times. Even if your count is slightly faster than a second, you are subjecting yourself to well over an hour of agonizingly slow respiratory control.
But the entire mechanism of action, the core biological hack, lies in that 64-count retention.
So to understand why a 64-count hold remodels your biology, we have to look at the blood chemistry of panic.
Right. If someone unaccustomed to this practice attempts a 64-count hold, they will likely hit a wall of severe suffocating panic around count 25 or 30.
But that panic isn't actually a lack of oxygen, right?
Right.
That's a massive misconception.
Exactly. You still have plenty of oxygen circulating in your bloodstream at count 30. Your brain is screaming that you are dying, but it's a faulty software alarm.
It is entirely an alarm triggered by carbon dioxide. As you hold your breath, CO2 accumulates in the blood, increasing its acidity.
You have chemoreceptors located in the brainstem, specifically in an area called the pre-Betzinger complex.
Right. Andrew Huberman discussed this extensively on the Huberman Lab podcast with Dr. Jack Feldman.
Yes, the guy who actually discovered the pre-Betzinger complex. These neurons measure blood acidity. When CO2 rises, they fire a massive alarm signal to the diaphragm, forcing an involuntary contraction.
You feel like you need oxygen, but you actually just need to expel carbon dioxide.
So by forcing yourself through that 64-count hold daily, you are weaponizing the concept of hormesis.
You are introducing a severe controlled stressor to force a beneficial adaptation.
You are aggressively altering your baseline carbon dioxide tolerance and retraining the brainstem to remain calm in a highly acidic chemical environment.
And by tolerating that acidic environment, you leverage the Bohr effect.
Right. In 1904, physiologist Christian Bohr discovered that elevated levels of carbon dioxide decrease the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen.
Hemoglobin being the protein in your red blood cells that carries oxygen.
Normally, hemoglobin is quite stingy. It holds onto oxygen tightly. But in a high CO2 acidic environment, the hemoglobin molecule undergoes a conformational change. It physically loosens its grip.
Meaning your red blood cells suddenly become significantly more efficient at dumping oxygen deep into the cellular tissues where it is needed most, rather than just hoarding it in the bloodstream.
You are literally suffocating the blood to hyperoxygenate the cell.
It's wild. Joe Rogan has explored this autonomic nervous system manipulation multiple times on the Joe Rogan Experience, most notably in his episodes with Wim Hof.
Wim discusses how controlled hyperventilation followed by retention completely alters the autonomic immune response.
But Osman is utilizing a different pathway entirely. He isn't hyperventilating to lower CO2. He is actively suppressing the breath to build immense CO2 tolerance over a slow, sustained hour.
Which raises the practical question, what is the cellular return on investment for enduring an hour of chemical suffocation daily for a year?
Yeah, why build this heavy-duty biological battery?
The ROI is found in a massive survival response initiated by mild, transient hypoxia brief, controlled windows of low oxygen.
At the cellular level, this stress triggers a protein complex known as hypoxia-inducible factor 1, or HIF-1.
The master switch for cellular resilience.
Right. When oxygen levels drop significantly during that 64-count hold, the HIF-1 alpha subunit is no longer degraded by the cell.
It stabilizes, binds with a beta subunit, and travels directly into the nucleus of the cell.
And once inside the nucleus, HIF-1 acts as a transcription factor, essentially commanding the genome to upregulate survival mechanisms.
And what does that actually look like for the tissue?
Primarily, it stimulates angiogenesis, the creation of entirely new capillary networks.
Your body physically builds new roads to deliver blood to previously underserved tissues. Furthermore, it forces the mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cells, to become ruthlessly efficient at producing ATP without relying heavily on oxygen.
Osman points to a really compelling University of California study regarding the physiological impacts of controlled respiratory patterns to back this up.
And the brilliance of the study is how they controlled for the placebo effect.
Because you can't exactly instruct a lab mouse to perform a 16-64-32 yogic breathwork routine.
No, so the researchers used chemical mimics. They administered compounds that trick the cellular pathways into responding as if the organism were undergoing targeted breath retention.
The mice didn't hold their breath, the chemicals just triggered the exact HIF-1 biochemical cascade.
And the results over a 6-month period were astounding. Researchers documented a 15 to 30% improvement in comprehensive health markers.
Massive reductions in disease biomarkers associated with cardiovascular disease and metabolic syndrome.
And a calculated longevity increase of up to 30%.
Let's contextualize that math for you. A 30% increase on an average 80-year human lifespan is 24 extra years of viable biological function.
You are pushing past a century not through a pharmaceutical intervention, but by endogenously restructuring your capillary networks.
It's like installing an emergency backup generator in your house that is so efficient, it ends up making the entire municipal electrical grid run flawlessly all the time.
But building that structural capacity takes 6 to 12 months of daily dedication.
And once you have built that heavy-duty biological battery through the 142 pranayama, you have to charge it and use it.
This is where we transition from the structural preparation to the active engine.
The Kriya protocol. And here is where we need to make a massive correction to the general understanding of this practice, based explicitly on Osman's detailed source logs.
We are going to strip away the mystical ambiguity and look at the exact mechanics of how you run high voltage through the central nervous system.
The mechanical precision here is absolutely non-negotiable. To perform one single round of Kriya, you begin by naturally breathing in through both nostrils.
For a specific count of 25, the objective is to fill the lungs to absolute 100% capacity.
Right. Once fully and deeply breathed in, you hold that breath for a count of 25.
But this isn't a relaxed retention. This is where the correction is vital.
Yes, during that 25-count hold, you are applying a severe internal mechanical pressure. Osman's logs describe this as pushing a downward force toward the base of the spine, as though you were taking a 10-pound hammer and breaking a rock to smithereens.
That analogy of the 10-pound hammer is the crux of the entire operation. You are generating intense physical intra-abdominal and cerebrospinal fluid pressure.
Why? Because that sheer force is required to release the dense biological energy locked at the base of the spine.
What esoteric traditions term kundalini energy.
Right, forcing it to rise up the spinal column.
Then, once you finish that intense 25-count pressurized hold, you release. You breathe out naturally at your own pace until you are in a resting position.
And then, and this is a crucial step for nervous system integration, you rest.
While resting, you breathe naturally for a count of 100 until you have fully recovered your breath.
Until your heart rate is normal and the central nervous system energy has settled back to a baseline state.
That entire sequence, the 25-count active inhalation, The 25-count pressurized hammer hold, the natural exhalation, and the 100-count natural resting breath constitutes exactly 1 round.
And the dosage parameters Osman lays out are incredibly strict. A beginner must execute a minimum of 12 rounds per day,
With the recommended baseline being 24 rounds per day.
and you stay at that 24-round dosage until you are highly proficient, which Osman notes normally takes at least 12 to 36 months.
You do not rush this. Your nervous system requires years to lay down the myelin sheathing and vascular capacity to handle the voltage.
Only after that 1 to 3 year period do you increase the dosage to 50 rounds per day.
You hold at 50 rounds per day for another 2 to 3 years.
Only then, if you're seeking substantive radical cellular repair, do you advance to 100 rounds per day.
And Osman issues a severe physiological warning here. Do not increase beyond 100 rounds.
Ever. Doing more than 100 rounds a day becomes actively dangerous. It is too much torque for the human nervous system to ground safely.
Not to mention, 100 rounds requires a massive time commitment that isn't necessary for the average person unless they are dealing with severe biological degradation.
When you look at the literature surrounding Kundalini and this type of intense spinal pressure, Osman's warnings perfectly align with historical documentation.
Take Gopi Krishna's autobiographical accounts from the 1970s.
Right. He accidentally triggered this massive nervous system energy without the foundational hardware upgrades or the proper systemic grounding.
And he spent years in absolute physiological agony, digestive failure, sensation of burning nerves, psychological fracturing.
We see the same discussions on Buddha at the gas pump. Rick Archer's interview with Dr. Bonnie Greenwell, a psychotherapist who specialized in Kundalini awakenings, highlights this perfectly.
When this central nervous system voltage is sourced up prematurely, it mimics severe psychiatric and neurological disorders. It is a very real, measurable biological force.
Even Paramahansa Yogananda, in his famous autobiography of a yogi, explicitly warned his students to limit Kriya practice to avoid frying their nervous systems.
But Osman, by spending years building the capillary networks via the 142 breathwork, essentially built a superconducting wire that allows him to safely hit that 100-round threshold.
And the justification for that staggering time commitment is the extreme healing it unlocks.
Let's examine the clinical anomaly of a vascular tissue repair.
Over decades of performing daily Muslim prayers, which require extensive and repeated kneeling, Osman developed severe chronic knee pain from mechanical stress.
From an orthopedic perspective, articular cartilage degradation is a one-way street. Cartilage is avascular. It completely lacks a dedicated blood supply.
It relies entirely on the slow, incredibly inefficient process of diffusion from the surrounding synovial fluid to receive nutrients and clear out cellular waste.
When it breaks down, the body simply cannot deliver repair cells fast enough to fix it.
Yet, Osman's logs document that upon reaching the 100-round Kriya protocol, decades of chronic cartilage pain completely evaporated in exactly 72 hours.
72 hours to repair a vascular tissue.
How is that physically possible? How does applying a 10-pound internal hammer of pressure during a breath hold rebuild a knee joint?
The mechanism of action is rooted in neuroimmunology. By applying that massive oscillating pressure to the cerebrospinal fluid and the vagus nerve 100 times a day, you are inducing a systemic cellular shock.
The vagus nerve dictates the inflammatory reflex.
Exactly. Hyperstimulation of these autonomic neuroimmune pathways essentially acts like a pressure washer.
Instead of relying on slow diffusion, the nervous system forces a localized flood of anti-inflammatory cytokines and growth factors directly into the synovial capsule,
Radically accelerating macrophage polarization from a destructive inflammatory state to a tissue repairing state.
He notes another instance of rapid regeneration, a severely loose tooth.
Following critical care bioenergy healing sessions, he would experience a severe dip in his own immune function, leading to a severely loose tooth.
But within 2 to 3 days of sustaining the 100-round Kriya practice, the periodontal ligaments completely stabilized.
For periodontal connective fibers to tighten and regenerate within a 72-hour window requires an explosive, systemic upregulation of fibroblast activity and collagen synthesis.
Lewis Howes has touched on these exact types of spontaneous remissions on the School of Greatness podcast.
Oh, when he interviews Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Yeah, exactly. They constantly look at case studies of individuals who use intense, elevated emotional states and breath work to radically alter their immune function in a matter of days.
Dispenza argues that the autonomic nervous system can be consciously directed to downregulate disease-causing genes and upregulate repair genes.
Ranveer Alabadia explores the same intersection of mysticism and neuroscience on The Ranveer Show.
In his interviews with Sadhguru, they discuss the exact mechanics of Kriya Yoga.
Sadhguru constantly emphasizes that Kriya is not a philosophical practice, it is pure internal engineering.
You are fundamentally altering the geometry and the chemical factory of the body.
But reaching these levels of accelerated cellular turnover traditionally requires extreme puritanical lifestyle restrictions.
And this brings us to Osman's pragmatism over dogma. He takes the ancient rulebook and completely discards the moral superiority of it, while acknowledging the underlying physics.
Now, we need to be clear, we are neutrally reporting on these traditions here. He is completely transparent about the acceleration factors.
He acknowledges the physiological truth found in the texts of Swami Sivananda and Ramakrishna. Absolute celibacy and strict raw vegan diets do speed up the energetic development by a factor of 15.
Why? Why do celibacy and raw vegetables act as a 15x biological acceleration factor?
Because the digestive and endocrine systems are massive metabolic drains. Consuming heavy complex proteins requires massive amounts of ATP cellular energy just to break them down.
By shifting to raw, easily assimilated foods, you eliminate metabolic drag. The body can reallocate that ATP to cellular repair.
And regarding the endocrine system, the body expends immense resources on reproductive functions and hormone synthesis.
By practicing celibacy, esoteric texts argue that you redirect that highly potent biological energy, often termed ojas upward, into the central nervous system to support the high voltage of kundalini.
Osman acknowledges the 15x speed boost, but he refuses to conflate biological efficiency with moral requirement.
He argues that you can still reach the ultimate destination without destroying your social and romantic life. It will just take longer.
He relies on specific dietary hacks instead of permanent dietary restriction.
He details a very specific daily smoothie in his logs: raw cauliflower, flaxseed, and an entire whole lemon peel and seeds included.
And he treats human aging purely as an engineering problem to be solved. Take natural testosterone decline.
Instead of viewing it as an unavoidable consequence of aging, he consumes raw egg yolks combined with a traditional Turkish fermented yogurt drink called ayran.
The biological logic there is sound.
Yeah.
He is utilizing the highly bioavailable cholesterol from the raw egg yolks cholesterol being the foundational precursor molecule for testosterone.
Right.
And using the potent probiotic environment of the fermented ayran to optimize gut absorption, naturally synthesizing hormones to combat decline.
And to prove that you don't need the sterile ashram to succeed, he points to a compelling case study of a female student.
She reached the highly advanced breathless state, a profound state of metabolic suspension, in just 12 months.
And during that entire year, she was walking her dogs, drinking with friends, maintaining her career, and engaging in an active romantic relationship with her soulmate.
Her trajectory proves the protocol is robust enough to withstand the friction of a modern lifestyle.
In fact, Osman suggests that psychological freedom and genuine human connections serve as a biological catalyst rather than a hindrance.
The reduction in psychological stress hormones like cortisol allows the parasympathetic nervous system to remain dominant, aiding the practice.
Which leads to his most radical stance, his absolute rejection of formal guru initiation, or diksha.
In many traditional yogic lineages, attempting advanced kriya without receiving diksha from an established guru is considered impossible or even blasphemous.
Osman is fiercely against it. He argues that diksha is essentially an eternal spiritual contract that subverts your own critical thinking.
He views it as tethering your energetic architecture to this specific lineage of the guru permanently. He champions self-diksha, spiritual sovereignty.
He states that the initiation happens the exact moment you pull the current up your spine yourself. You are the architect.
It is an open source software project. You download the base code, the 142 breath, the Kriya mechanics, but you compile it for your own unique hardware, your own lifestyle, and your own beliefs.
You retain absolute executive control.
But there is a massive caveat to being your own architect. If you are compiling that heavy software, running 100 rounds of high-pressure Kriya while engaging in a normal friction-filled life, you are generating massive internal torque.
Without proper structural maintenance, that torque will literally rip the biological chassis apart.
This leads us to the exhaust system, grounding the voltage. You can't run a commercial kitchen at maximum capacity, fire the cleaning staff, and expect the restaurant not to catch fire.
Osman points to severe cautionary tales, specifically figures like Swami Vivekananda.
Swami Vivekananda was a brilliant intellectual and spiritual giant who brought Vedanta to the West in the late 19th century.
But he died at the age of 39, suffering from a host of physical ailments including diabetes, asthma, and organ failure.
Osman's implication is that Vivekananda's internal central nervous system voltage escalated far faster than his biological hardware could adapt.
He essentially vibrated his own biological machine to pieces because he lacked the physical grounding.
So how does Osman prevent the machine from shaking apart? First, he insists on heavy physical strength training. He uses muscle tissue as a metabolic sink.
This completely upends the visual of the frail, emaciated yogi sitting under a tree.
Muscle tissue is metabolically expensive and incredibly dense. Building significant muscle mass provides the physical density required to ground and house high-voltage central nervous system energy without overwhelming the delicate neural pathways.
And then there is the absolute non-negotiable brake pedal, the 6-hour sleep red line.
Osman recounts his own catastrophic biological breakdown when he attempted to operate on 3 hours of sleep while managing his businesses and his intensive Kriya practice.
The biology of why that breakdown occurred is perfectly explained by modern neuroscience.
If we look at Andrew Huberman's extensive podcast discussions on sleep, particularly his interview with Dr. Matthew Walker, the author of Why We Sleep, the mechanics become obvious.
When you are overclocking your brain with 100 rounds of advanced Kriya, your neurons are firing at a vastly accelerated rate, demanding massive amounts of ATP.
And the byproduct of that hypermetabolism is cellular exhaust, specifically metabolic byproducts like amyloid beta proteins.
Neurotoxic waste.
Exactly. And the brain has a highly specialized plumbing system called the glymphatic system to clear this waste.
But the glymphatic system is almost entirely inactive while you are awake.
It's only during deep, slow-wave sleep that the glial cells in the brain physically shrink by up to 60%.
This shrinkage creates literal space for the cerebrospinal fluid to wash through the brain and flush the toxic amyloid beta proteins out into the circulatory system to be cleared by the liver.
So if you are running industrial voltage through your brain with Kriya, but restricting your sleep to 3 hours, you are keeping the engine redlined while actively preventing the glymphatic system from flushing the exhaust.
It is a guaranteed recipe for neurodegeneration, cognitive decline, and physical collapse. Are we driving our systems with stimulants, biohacks, and intense stress, but firing the cleaning staff by ignoring sleep?
It demands a brutal self-assessment of our own routines.
To further aid the nervous system, Osman utilizes targeted acoustic resonance, exploring the principles of cymatics.
But again, he strips the practice of religious dogma. He doesn't use mantras as prayers to deities. He uses them as pure sound frequencies to tune localized biological receivers within the body.
For example, he uses specific acoustic frequencies targeting the solar plexus region, what esoteric traditions call the Manipura chakra, to physically stimulate dopaminergic drive and assertiveness right before entering a demanding business negotiation.
He treats the body like an acoustic instrument, claiming this localized tuning speeds up energetic development by 15x over a 90-day period.
He also heavily utilizes delta state meditation. Normal waking consciousness operates in beta or alpha brainwave frequencies.
Delta waves, ranging from 0.5 to 4 Hz, are the slowest brainwaves, normally only accessed during the deepest, most restorative stages of dreamless sleep.
But Osman trains the ability to consciously access and maintain that 0.5 to 4 Hz delta state while remaining completely awake.
By dropping the brainwave frequency that low, he essentially shuts off the sympathetic nervous system entirely, moving the body into a state of profound biological restoration, acting as a massive receiver for ambient bioenergy to repair the physical tissue.
So if we synthesize all of this, if you master the 142 CO2 tolerance protocol, safely build the capillary networks, scale up to the 100-round Kriya practice, build the muscle density, strictly guard your deep sleep, and tune your nervous system acoustically.
What is the ultimate theoretical destination of all this biological engineering?
This is where we look at the ultimate horizon. And it requires rejecting what Osman calls the meat suit philosophy.
Many spiritual traditions view the physical body as a prison, a temporary meat suit that consciousness is trapped inside, with the ultimate goal being to escape the body entirely.
Osman vehemently rejects that. He cites the experiences of the 19th century mystic Sri Ramakrishna, who reported entering profound out-of-body states where he possessed perfect, expansive sensory perception, but zero physical agency.
He couldn't touch anything. He couldn't interact with the material world.
Osman uses this to highlight a profound truth. You need physical density to hold your child. You need the nervous system to experience a sunset, to feel tactile reality, to engage in love.
The physical body isn't a prison. It is the ultimate vehicle for consciousness. The goal is mastering the vehicle, maintaining it indefinitely, not escaping it.
And mastering the vehicle leads us to the cellular math of the deathless body. Now, esoteric texts are filled with historical anomalies. Figures like Mahavatar Babaji or Avalalar, who allegedly achieved extreme longevity or suspended the aging process entirely.
While that sounds like sheer mythology, Osman breaks it down into theoretical cellular mathematics.
Let's look at the math. Normal human aging operates at a rate of 1 day per day. Every 24 hours, your cells divide, telomeres shorten, and epigenetic damage accumulates.
But as we established earlier with the UC mouse study, implementing the foundational pranayama protocol significantly alters that rate.
The transient hypoxia upregulates repair genes, dropping the rate of aging from 1 day per day to approximately zero point 0.7 days per day.
So you are aging slower. But the radical shift occurs when you add the massive localized regenerative power of the 100-round Kriya protocol.
The objective is to reach what Osman calls the break-even point of 0 days per day. The rate of cellular repair perfectly matches the rate of cellular decay.
And eventually, the theory posits, crossing the threshold into actual biological age reversal.
And this is where ancient esoteric theory collides violently with modern Nobel Prize-winning science. We have to look at the work of Dr. Shinya Yamanaka.
Andrew Huberman discussed this at length on his podcast with Dr. David Sinclair, a leading longevity researcher from Harvard.
With the Yamanaka factors, this is the holy grail of modern biology. In 2006, Shinya Yamanaka proved that by introducing 4 specific transcription factors into mature, specialized cells, like a skin cell, you could strip away all the epigenetic age markers.
You could revert that old cell entirely back to a youthful, pluripotent stem cell.
Cellular age reversal is no longer science fiction. It is a demonstrable biological reality in a petri dish.
Yamanaka won the Nobel Prize for this discovery in 2012.
It's like taking a corrupted, fragmented hard drive on an old computer and completely reformatting it back to its pristine, factory-new settings.
Modern science is trying to figure out how to deliver these Yamanaka factors via pharmaceutical injections or gene therapy without causing tumors. But Osman's hypothesis is entirely endogenous.
He theorizes that ancient civilizations did not need a lab to induce epigenetic reprogramming.
They used extreme internal biopressure, the localized transient hypoxia, the hyperstimulation of the vagus nerve, and targeted acoustic resonance to endogenously stimulate the expression of those exact same transcription factors.
Osman views practitioners of these advanced esoteric arts as biological archaeologists. When he looks at the massive, seemingly impossible architectural achievements of antiquity, the Great Pyramids, the monolithic Kailasa temple carved out of a single rock face in India, he doesn't see primitive cultures.
He hypothesizes that these civilizations possessed an integrated, highly advanced mastery of both macroscopic physics and microscopic biology.
Modern practitioners aren't inventing something new. They are painstakingly reverse engineering a lost science through extreme bioenergetic discipline.
It is a staggering paradigm shift. It takes the mystical and demands that it be grounded in the quantifiable realities of cellular metabolism and gene expression.
We have covered massive ground today. We recapped the journey of a man who pursued the source code of human biology from age 10.
We looked at how he overcame CO2 panic to build a 64-count breath hold infrastructure.
We corrected the mechanics of the Kriya protocol, the 25-count inhalation, the 25-count hammer hold, the critical 100-count rest, and how scaling that to 100 rounds healed a vascular cartilage.
We explored his rejection of puritanical dogma, relying on raw foods and Aeron, and the absolute necessity of heavy lifting and deep sleep to handle the voltage.
It is an incredibly comprehensive, relentlessly demanding operating system for the human body. So I want you to evaluate your own routine right now. Are you pushing the accelerator with caffeine and stress, but lacking the foundational brakes of adequate sleep?
Are you unknowingly trapped by your brainstem's false CO2 alarms?
There is a free 5-minute yoga and meditation program available for download from Osman's website, yogawellness786.com, if you want to dip your toes into the very baseline of this physiological control. But I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today.
What is the ultimate implication?
We are currently sitting at a massive, unprecedented technological inflection point. We have artificial intelligence systems like AlphaFold mapping the entire universe of protein structures in days.
We have quantum computers beginning to model biology at the atomic level.
What happens when these advanced AI models are fed the precise, esoteric bioenergetic data of a 64-second breath hold? or the exact biomechanical cascade of a 25-count pressurized Kundalini surge.
That is the ultimate convergence. Will AI finally definitively validate the mystics?
Exactly. Will quantum biology prove that the ancients were right all along? We might be rapidly approaching a future where enlightenment and cellular age reversal transition from being a grueling, lifelong spiritual pursuit into a meticulously prescribed standard medical protocol available at a local clinic.
Human evolution is on the verge of becoming a conscious, engineered choice.
The X-ray machine of biology isn't just broken, it's about to get upgraded to show us the source code. Take a deep 25-count breath, pull it up the spine, apply the pressure, and begin your own experiment. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.